Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Raphael Henkes, and I have the honor this year of introducing our distinguished speaker, Professor Aleida Assman, a scholar who has shaped our understanding of the role of the past in both the present and the future like few others. Her expertise is in demand not only in academic discourse, but also in public debates on many current social and geopolitical conflicts around the world. Fittingly, Alexander Kaman described her in the German newspaper Die Zeit alongside her husband Jan Assmann as the most influential intellectual couple of our time. Scholars and students across disciplines and national borders who engage with memory in its many forms and far-reaching ramifications have been profoundly influenced by her concepts. Among these contributions, she has demonstrated through her comprehensive concept of cultural memory how individual and collective memory are embedded within societies. In doing so, she has illuminated the underlying connections between functions, material carriers, and political processes that shape the emergence, form, and transformation of something conceived as eternal, yet so susceptible to manipulation. Key aspects such as forgetting as an inevitable component of any memory process and temporality as a structuring principle have been central to her work, making it a milestone in the field of memory studies. Therefore, it comes as no surprise that many of her books have been translated into multiple languages. One of her key publications on this subject, Cultural Memory and Western Civilization, Functions, Media, and Archives, was fittingly described by the American historian Peter Fritsch with the following words. Aleida Assman brings startling originality, brilliant explanation, and conceptual rigor to the difficult and sprawling terrain of memory. This is a classic path-breaking work to which readers will remain long indebted. Her central focus has been on the memory of traumatic pasts. Works such as Shadows of Trauma, Memory, and the Politics of Post-War Identity categorize and explain the diverse forms, developments, uses, and conflicts surrounding the Holocaust memories in the post-war period, both in Germany and on a transnational level. Building on this foundation, her work has never been intended solely for academic purposes. Through her research on conflicts arising from the legacies of traumatic events, she has also developed models such as dialogic memory, which aim to contribute to conflict resolution and reconciliation process, demonstrating her remarkable intellectual versatility. But how has everything started? Regarding her academic career, she began her studies in English literature and Egyptology at the universities of Heidelberg and Tübingen. She later obtained her PhD in English studies at Heidelberg, where she also completed her habilitation. Following this, she was appointed as a professor at University of Constance in the Department of English and General Literature. She has also had numerous fellowships and visiting professorships across Europe and the United States, too many to list in full, so I will mention only a few examples. This includes fellowships at the Center for Interdisciplinary Research at Bielefeld University, the Abi Warburg House, Hamburg, the Wissenschaftskolleg in Berlin, and the Sir Peter Ustinov Professorship at the University of Vienna. In the United States, she has held positions as visiting scholar at the Getty Center in Santa Monica, a short-term lecturer at Rice University in Houston, and has held visiting professorships at Princeton, Yale, and Chicago. It is no surprise that several institutions have attempted to retain her for a longer period, yet she has remained loyal to her Baden-Württemberg homeland. Naturally, numerous awards and honors have marked her career, and I will mention only one. In 2022, she was honored with Grand Cross of Merit with Star of the Federal Republic of Germany. She received this distinction alongside Christopher Clark, who is also present in this audience tonight and will give the response later, in recognition of the outstanding research on historical politics and memory culture in Germany. And now I'm delighted to hand over the stage to you, Aleida, for what promises to be a fascinating lecturer on changing concepts of the future and the ethics of repair. Please join me in welcoming Aleida Assman.
Dear Raphael and dear Dacia, can you hear me? Is this? First of all, let me thank you and tell you what a huge honor and joy it is to be here tonight. I must say, during the 4 days, it's just 4 days that I'm here in Cambridge, I was prepared that Cambridge's cultural heritage is impressive. And I can really only repeat that I was overwhelmed with it. But what I found even more impressive during these days is Cambridge's intangible cultural heritage, and that is the spirit of hospitality with which you invited me, and we passed these last days. I'm very, very grateful to you. This has been an unforgettable, and I speak now for the future, and this is the topic, will be an unforgettable experience. So my topic is concepts of the future, and in this case I will start with an English novel. You learned that I was a professor of English literature in Germany for a long time, and therefore I start, wait a minute. I start with a quote from the novel of Graham Swift, and the novel is Waterland. And he says in this novel, "Back in the bright 60s, there was still plenty of future on offer. Today, I'm not asking how much future we still have, but rather how we can create future. I will call this doing future. Future can emerge where we do something for it and invest in it, like plant an apple tree, give birth to a child, or emit fewer pollutants into the environment. Secondly, I will ask which futures, in order to find out how future is imagined in our society. It turns out that there is not just one concept of future available, but several futures that we relate to. They belong to different time regimes. And here I give you my definition of what I mean by this word, time regime. I call a system of temporality that is culturally constructed, grounded in the institutions of the state, and anchored in the feelings of the society. It is a common imaginary that informs the thinking, planning, acting, and feeling of the collective and its individuals. By shifting now the word from the singular to the plural, I will present three meanings of future that you all know, but which are rarely discussed together because they partly contradict each other or compete with each other often. Nevertheless, they are all in use, and we need them all. By switching now from future to futures, I hope to expand our frame of thinking about the future and to open up new perspectives. My first meaning of future is connected with such key terms as rupture, change, and renewal. The future is that period of time in which the world is expected to continuously become a better place. This promise of universal progress is bound up with Western modernization and technology. The Western world has produced this modernization process, and the modernization process has produced the Western world. In this frame of thinking, the new, and this is very important, the new is clearly pitted against the old, with the new always standing for the better and more promising and more advanced option. The necessity of breaking with traditions, something very difficult to even utter in a city like Cambridge. So the necessity of breaking with traditions is an important feature of this modernist concept of future, and also played a major role in the arts, especially at the beginning of the 20th century. And here I give you just two quotes. One is from Thomas Mann, Dr. Faustus. There is basically only one problem in the world, and it has the name, how does one break through? How does one get into the open? How does one burst the chrysalis and become a butterfly? The overall situation is dominated by this question. At different periods in history, there were different narratives and degrees of progress available. Hegel's plan of history predicted a long-term, steady, and irreversible process in which civilization evolves across centuries in a linear way from less conscious stages to material fulfillment, aesthetic perfection, or spiritual transcendence. A much more violent idea of breaking and rupture, on the other hand, played a role in the politics and art of the movement of futurism in the early 20th century. Here, just short quote. From Italy, we hurl into the world our manifesto of overwhelming and incendiary violence with which we today found futurism. For we want to free this land from its cancer of professors, archaeologists, tour guides, and antiquarians. I'm sorry to pronounce this on this day of your annual lecture. The intellectual backbone behind the different narratives of progress and modernization is the radical opposition between past and future. Historian Reinhard Koselleck, himself an intellectual modernist, brilliantly reduced this basic structure of the modern time regime to the simple formula, and here I give it to you, breaking apart, on the one hand, the space of experience, from, on the other hand, the horizon of expectation. So these two realms have nothing to do with each other anymore. In his view, future and past are totally opposite. They stand opposed as the old and the new, whereby the old is always synonymous with past, obsolete, outdated, while all hopes are directed towards the new. To fully embrace better and brighter future, one must therefore, in this logic, write off the past and leave it behind. This notion of future and its time regime of modernity prevailed during the first 4 decades of my life in post-war Germany, and I give you now a few examples from experience. After 1945, the determination to turn one's back to the past and the catastrophic cataclysm of the 20th century, to mark a new beginning and to embrace a bright future, was a general hope in both Eastern and Western Europe. Risen from rubble and ruins, we are turning towards a bright future. Auferstanden aus Ruinen und der Zukunft, zugewandt. These were the first lines of the national anthem of the GDR. The same narrative and time regime was also shared by the Western allies. In 1946, Churchill gave a speech at the University of Zurich in which he presented his program for a new Europe that was focused entirely on the future. These are his words. We must all turn our back upon the horrors of the past. We must look to the future. If Europe is to be saved from infinite misery and indeed from final doom, it must be, we must found it upon a, on an act of faith in the European family and an act of oblivion against all the crimes and follies of the past. During my school and university years in West Germany, I was educated into an uninhibited optimism about the future. At the same time, in the society, large and small promises were fulfilled. In the period immediately following the end of World War II, many citizens, including many migrant families from Eastern Europe, quickly achieved prosperity and wealth in the new state. Modernization was also writ large in the cities. Many historical buildings that had survived the war were removed and replaced with new construction. In the 1960s, ambitious new universities were founded. Their image and vision was no longer built on long traditions, like my alma mater in Heidelberg, but proudly presented themselves as newcomers opting for progress and future, such as Bielefeld, Bochum, or my university in Konstanz. In addition, new technical inventions like television changed the world, and less noticed, new synthesized materials such as concrete or plastic started to change the environment. And in 1969, a technological dream of mankind came true, the first landing of humans on the moon. But only 10 years later, already this optimistic trend started to falter. In 1979, Jean-François Lyotard coined his influential formula about the end of the grand narratives, among which he included the post-war narrative of modernity and progress. With the end of the Cold War and the return of suppressed accounts of Hitler's and Stalin's crimes, the postmodern era began. The vision of future and progress, however, was not abruptly ended, but continued in the institutions in less conspicuous ways. The natural sciences and technology are still powerful engines of modernization and remain the backbone of Western civilization. There is no easy exit from modernization and the Western civilization that it supports. I come to my second meaning of future, and this is a reference to something that I'm skipping, and that is that in the economy right now, what we are observing is that there's a new principle of growth, which can be called creative destruction. It is called disruptive innovation, and I lead it back to the term creative destruction, which is very influential for the modern time regime. So in the economy, it is certainly still present. My next future is future as uncertainty and risk management. It relates to everything that is unknown, unexpected, or still unthought. The unknown future is inevitably moving towards us and hits us as a pleasant or unpleasant surprise. Que sera, sera. Some of us here in this room may perhaps still remember the words from Doris Day's song in an American film from the 1950s. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, the future is not ours to see. Que sera, sera. The notion of the uncertain future is universal. It exists in all cultures. Future is what happens to people that they cannot foresee. This perspective is reserved for God. Expressions like Inshallah or Deo volente are introduced in some languages in all sentences that deal with the future tense, and they emphasize this fundamental unknowability of the future. This concept is often connected with a fatalistic attitude toward time. The wisdom of Doris Day's song lies precisely in this self-limitation, que sera, sera. Good or bad, we must wait patiently and accept whatever the future has in store for us. But there is also a more active way to react to the unknowability of the future and to guard against the uncertain. In Judaism, prophets were sent by God, which revealed the future, but at the same time there was an explicit prohibition against approaching this future with oracles and practices of divination. That would have dangerously limited general trust in the absolute divine will. In Mesopotamia, on the other hand, there were elaborate techniques to gain control over the mystery of the future. Assyriologist Stefan Maul speaks in this context of Zukunftsbewältigung, coping with the future, a term he coined in analogy with coping with or coming to terms with the past. In the Middle Ages, the future was the domain of the unpredictable goddess Fortuna, of whom it was said that she was constant only in unpredictable change. In the early modern period, this attitude toward the future fundamentally changed. It was no longer seen in the frame of blind exposure and powerlessness, but in the frame of risk and opportunity around 1500, when the colonial period started and merchants started to travel across the Atlantic and other seas. The first great entrepreneurs who crossed the ocean to reach the New World did so with a new compass and in the spirit of self-empowerment vis-à-vis an uncertain future. Their motto was, "Who dares will win." Modern societies created the hero of the explorer. Venturing into the unknown was discovering new territories, and discovering new territories was inspired by a culture privileging chance and change, new visions and new possibilities. As the heroism of chance was also accompanied with risks and losses, modern societies have invented insurance systems that minimize the risk. Divination techniques like opinion polls, diagrams, scenarios create a shield against loss and provide security even in danger, yet the risk grows together with the success. And here, I would like to refer you to the work of Ulrich Beck, who is really the sociologist of risk, who has actually moved in his publications from risk as a chance, as a possibility, as a resource of modernity, all the way to catastrophe or doom as the loss that risk entails. My next meaning is future as sustainability. This term emerged only in the 1970s in the wake of a new ecological consciousness. This new awareness of the limits of growth and the finitude of natural resources spread with the publications of the Club of Rome, which radically shifted not only our relationship to the world, but also our orientation in time. The refrain of a song by Joni Mitchell expresses this experience of a sudden and radical loss very succinctly, that you just don't know what you've got till it's gone. Since then, knowledge about the limits of growth and the finitude of natural resources has radically changed our relation to the world and our orientation in time. This shift had immediate and radical impact on the meaning of the word future. The future that no longer promises to fulfill our wishes and hopes now became the object of serious concerns, growing care, and a new ethics of responsibility. In this meaning, future is no longer exclusively linked to a sudden and abrupt change or to surprise and risk. Instead of longing for what is totally new and different, a new hope was directed towards the continuity of what was already there and here and valued, but can no longer be taken for granted. This calls for a new perspective that positions humans in their environment and in ethics of stewardship vis-à-vis the cosmos and its resources. Future, in this sense of ecological awareness and efforts towards preservation, is grounded in a keen sense of the imminent danger of losing the basis for survival of the species and the obligation to invest into the future of succeeding generations. The concept of sustainability involves an entirely new concept of human responsibility and, in doing so, has dramatically expanded both the temporal horizon of the past and the future. With the entry into the Anthropocene, formally announced in August 2016, we no longer live only with a short or medium-term view forward, but find ourselves in an entirely different time of calculation, namely a big history that counts back and forwards in thousands and millions of years, and in which human existence is only a small episode. In light of the new chronology of the Anthropocene, it turns out that after the destruction of Europe in 2 world wars, what followed seamlessly in the second half of the 20th century was another history of destruction of the planet through science and technology. It was especially the enforced progress since the 1950s and 60s with the new inventions, including plastic and eternal chemicals, that irreversibly affected the environment. The perspective of sustainability, namely Future 3, thus turns out to be the unreflected flip side of progress and modernization, namely Future 1. I found this reinterpretation of these two futures in a poster with the inscription, "Sustainable is the new profitable." In other words, from now on, economy and ecology must join forces. Sustainability, however, is not only something positive. Together, we are confronted with a growing accumulation of things that we can no longer get rid of. Prosperity waste, radioactive deposits, non-degradable pollutants. These things will, as experts assure us, leave their traces in Earth's history for millions of years to come. I would like to suggest that in the realm of culture and history, there is also a negative form of sustainability in the form of historical wounds and traumas. The history of the 20th century is abundant in cases of excessive violence against civilian populations and notorious for its after effects in individual and collective memories. Since time does not heal these wounds, traumatic violence is producing a past that does not pass, which requires coping processes even after decades and centuries. Last month, we commemorated the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp after 80 years, where the baton of memory is now passed on from the survivors to their children and grandchildren. The negative sustainability of traumatic pasts can be ignored and suppressed for a long time. Here too, a new concept of responsibility has emerged, this time in the political, social, and cultural framework of a human rights regime. Responsibility in this context means coping with historical wounds through cultural practices of remembrance, recognition, and empathy. The term coming to terms with the past is misleading. It suggests that this process is directed towards a definite goal like reparation, healing, or even redemption. Creating a shared memory of a trauma, on the other hand, means creating a new sensibility for and supportive relationship with the former victims that helps to reduce the destructive sustainability of trauma and thereby creating a future. It encourages to learn from history and to build up a shared knowledge that supports a sense of self-critical prevention. In this case, the emphasis and hope in this process rests on the transformative power of memory. Today, future and past do no longer exist in strict opposition. This is really the main point that we have learned from enlarging the number of futures. They no longer exist in opposition. Unlike physical time, even the time of memory does not run in a linear way. It is reversible. The sustainable future is always already saturated with the past, both in a positive and in a negative sense. In this time regime, the emphasis is no longer on rupture and new start, but on the contrary, on recovering or mending the past by connecting it with the future. Now I want to move on and introduce an example with which I connect with the term repair. Repair projects are currently relevant in all areas in strengthening positive sustainability and in reducing negative sustainability. In what follows now, I would like to illustrate this shift from the time regime of modernity to that of sustainability by introducing this example from architecture. In 19 1968, the famous architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe gave the city of Berlin a new signature building, which was to house the new National Gallery. It was the last major project of the master of modernism, who designed it as a completely square temple of steel and glass for this purpose. On its granite base, the building rises in the center of Berlin like a modern acropolis, whose flat roof rests on 8 columns. When it was built, it symbolized the freedom of the West in the recently divided city of Berlin. The wall was built in 61, and this building was built in 68. 50 years later now, this building had transformed into a ruin and was no longer functional. It became apparent that the construction method had not been sustainable. Water had penetrated the building and caused devastation. The temple of art had begun to rot and decay. The building had to be closed for an extended period of renovation. The architect entrusted with this task was David Chipperfield. Together with his team, he dismantled the entire building and broke it down into its components. Before he could reassemble, however, he first had to develop an entirely different construction principle that would avoid the previous building's flaws. It was especially about how to connect glass to steel. That is a very complicated issue. The reconstruction of Mies van der Rohe's Neue Nationalgalerie was equivalent to a new construction. Normally, following the familiar logic of Future One in terms of progress and modernization, the old building would have had to be demolished and replaced by a new one. At the same time, one architect's name would have been erased and overwritten by another one. However, this did not happen. During the course of the work, Chipperfield developed not only a new technique for sustainable reconstruction, but also a new philosophy of architecture. His name for this project was Repair. Based on this experience, Chipperfield, one of the famous modernists of contemporary architecture, started to specialize in repair. Since then, he no longer thinks about architecture exclusively from the perspective of outstanding buildings competing for attention in public space, but also in terms of creating a sustainable social urban space. The concept repair downplays the notion of the artist as transcendent genius who sells his or her mega product on the art market. Chipperfield departed from this well-known framework of modernist art. He himself found clear words for this new practice, drawing on the shift from the time regime of modernity to that of sustainability. And I quote some of his thoughts: unlike the radical and visionary architects of the 20th century, we do not need to create images and models for a future brave new world, but rather we need to secure, protect, and cherish the one we have. As an architect, Chipperfield has not only practically performed the work of reconstruction, but also formulated important principles for what I would like to call an ethics of repair. Here is an excerpt from one of his speeches. Commenting on the Neue Nationalgalerie, he noted, on his work there, he noted, the laws of matter were not observed. It was our responsibility to fix technical deficiencies without losing the aesthetics. Why not simply throw away the old? Repair is an unmodern concept. It means restoring the building without compromising the aesthetic. It goes against the grain of modernism as the heroic period in architecture. It is the result of the decision that the patient should live and demands a collective intelligence and responsibility. This effort needs the reframing of goals, coordinating a conversation around new questions that move from representations in artistic space, dominated by the genius of the artist, to social space that is preserved. Last sentence. In this realignment with the community, we must question the rivalrous nature of the architecture profession itself, which tends to put us in competition with one another, rather than emphasize our common purpose and shared responsibility. With this example, Chipperfield has opened an unfamiliar path for architecture. After having emphatically aligned himself with the concept of progress and seeing himself as a beacon of modernization, Chipperfield now consciously introduces a different language and unmodern concepts to speak about architecture in the mode of sustainability, repair, patient, shared responsibility, social space. Chipperfield does not reject modernity. He's not a renegade, but he discovers the problematic reverse side of a modernity that only celebrates individual genius while forgetting the historical framework and, above all, the social embedding of his work. His ethics of repair is a counter-proposal that consciously contrasts the arrogance of the architect genius with an attitude of humility in which he preserves a colleague's work with respect and care. Can this ethics of repair, I want to ask here, be generalized? Is it also possible to repair the negative sustainability of historical wounds and traumas? Indeed, yes, I would answer. Possibilities for repair open up in all areas. In the art world, in environmental protection, in the climate crisis, but also in processing histories of violence. In the course of globalization, more and more cultures are asserting their right to their own history. The context for these new claims and practices is the current process of decolonization. This is my definition of the term decolonization. I would say it stands for a two-sided political and cultural program that aims at stepping out of the power relations that have been produced by racist regimes such as slavery and colonialism. It is this area in which the concept of repair has first come up and is increasingly being employed today. So here comes my conclusion. The question, can the past be repaired, is not a new one. It was once asked and immediately denied. I'm thinking of Walter Benjamin and his historical political thesis. The center of this work is dedicated to the angel of history, who would like to exchange in this work of repair, but it is beyond his power. I quote, "There is a famous painting by Paul Klee named Angelus Novus, which shows an angel looking as though he is about to move away from something that he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned toward the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing in from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. The storm is what we call progress. The angel of history can no longer repair anything because he cannot linger and is constantly driven towards the future. Humans, on the other hand, can and must take their time to devote themselves to this task, even if they can never do what the angel had set out to do. And I would like to argue that this term repair can be applied not only to material objects, but also to the wounds and traumas of history. The moment we move from the time regime of progress to that of sustainability. The situation is completely changed, and I will give you just 2 quotes here, which take us into a different field. And again, this is literature. This quote comes from Faulkner. It's one of the, I think, most quoted sentences in memory studies. The past is not dead, it's not even past. And another quote from Toni Morrison, who have invented memory studies before they arrived in the 1990s. She commented on the time regime of modernity, which is also known as the American dream, when she wrote, "We live in a land where the past is always erased, and America is the innocent future in which immigrants can come and start over, where the slate is clean. The past is absent or it's romanticized. This culture doesn't encourage dwelling on, let alone coming to terms with the truth about the past." And I would like also to add another voice. Now it's the 3rd generation of the civil rights movement in the United States, Amanda Gorman, speaking on January 2021, where she said, "Being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it." So, repairing the past is possible, and it is easy enough, but it takes time, courage, and involves mutual recognition. Putting the stories together that are told within communities is the task here. And in the US, for instance, it could ensure that the white part of the nation would include the experience of slavery into its history and shared history, and also to withdraw toxic symbols from the public realm. Repair in this case could mean just this: putting yourself into the position of the other and listen to what he or she, what has been silent over generations, in order to create a more inclusive version of a shared traumatic history. More generally speaking, repairing the past could mean to work towards mutual recognition among 2 groups by establishing the historical truth about a shared traumatic history. This could be the hope, I think, of a better future, and is certainly worth trying. Progress can still happen, no longer in the framework of an institutionalized time regime, but perhaps step by step, producing literally Fortschritte based on human efforts and practices. So, yes, I think it's possible, even though we can never hope to do what Benjamin's angel of history had set out to do, awakening the dead and making whole what had been broken. Thank you very much.
Aleida, thank you so much for that brilliant and beautiful paper. It's wonderful to be able to welcome this star from the German academic and cultural firmament to Cambridge. It was a wide-ranging paper, moving so easily and elegantly across disciplines, epochs, and examples, and working in such a sophisticated way with concepts and categories and theories. So thank you very much for that. And of course, you reminded us, among many other things, of the fact that the future and the past are as mutable as the present. In fact, as you've shown us, they form an ensemble in which transformations in the present cannot but affect our understanding of past and future. I was reminded of the Soviet-era Russian joke. It's exciting to be an historian in the Soviet Union because the past is so unpredictable. The joke only works, thank you for laughing, I know it's an old one. The joke only works because we presume that unpredictability is a property exclusive to the future. Aleida cites the words of the song sung by Doris Day, she pronounces it K Sarah Sarah, whereas in the progressive future of modernity, we were charging, pressing towards the future, trying to reach it as fast as possible. In the disenchanted future of uncertainty, as Aleida observes, it's the future that is coming for us, whether we want it or not. And this may help to explain the recursive character of some of the most influential political movements of our time. Make America great again, the key word being again. The motto of the Brexit campaign in this country was take back control. And you have to admit that the solution of the Brexiteers to the problem of the unknown or the uncertain future was brilliant. If the future is so uncertain, why not replace it with the past? Or at least we know what was in the past, or we think we do. Boris Johnson certainly thought he knew what was in the past. He wrote a study of Churchill entitled One Man Who Made History, in which he shared with his readers a startling discovery, namely that Boris Johnson and Winston Churchill are in fact the same person. But when Aleida urges us to reflect on the past, she means something altogether different. I mean, it couldn't be more different from Boris Johnson. Not the dusting off of the past as a victory trophy or a pedestal for the restless ego, not its co-option into fantasies of self-empowerment, but an open-ended, attentive, thoughtful engagement with the past, an empathetic engagement with the past, because what she's been telling us is as much about a kind of temperament, a period temperament, as it is about an intellectual project. And we should approach the past, she suggests, as a warning, as the memory of precious things and of precious people that were lost or destroyed, or who were lost and destroyed. She proposes that we engage with the past, present, and future under the rubric of an ethics of repair. As an example of, and repair is an interesting word because it points into the past and the future at the same time. You can only repair what is already there. But why do you repair it? You repair it in order to prepare it for the future. As an example of someone who exemplifies the value of such an approach, she offers the architect David Chipperfield and his project to repair the Nationalgalerie of Mies van der Rohe in Berlin. Chipperfield brought a deep respect and even love to the building he was entrusted with preparing for its next 100 years of life at the center of a great city, but he was also alert to the need not to repeat the errors of the past. So this was a thoughtful, empathetic, but also critical engagement with what was there, with the legacy of the past. And I was touched to hear Aleida speak of it because we were both present when David Chipperfield explained his concept of repair during a tour of the works on this wonderful building. And it's interesting, I still remember I saw Aleida kind of light up like this, and she immediately started making notes. And we are now the beneficiaries of that moment of enlightenment. Aleida's plea for an ethics of repair is directed against something. Elon Musk, the arch disruptor, whose rocket science has endowed the recursiveness of MAGA with a new and destructive futurity. Remember, MAGA had a rather backward-looking quality in the first administration of Trump. It's acquired a forward-looking. Trump had said, we're going to bring steel back to Philadelphia. Well, that's as well as may be, if you can. But what Musk is telling him is, we'll turn this steel into rockets, and they will take us to Mars. And Musk has shown no interest, or at least has shown no interest so far, in repairing the planet that we all share. He would rather trash it and replace it with another. No one who's heard your words tonight, Aleida, will be unaware of the fact that federal funding has been withheld in recent weeks from Black History Month programs, for example, at public libraries across the United States. I'm thinking here of what Toni Morrison said about Eurasia, and from research programs in the sciences that happen to contain the word climate. Young scientists are being advised to remove the word climate from the titles of their research programs in order not to attract the claim that their work is woke. Senior figures have been sacked without notice on the grounds that they were supposedly DEI hires. And the Trump slogan, "Drill, baby, drill," is not suggestive of an ethics of repair, to put it mildly. Although actually the slogan is more interesting than one might think. We can trace it back to the title of Mario Bava's 1966 Italian Gothic horror film, Kill, Baby, Kill. That's where it comes from, in which the ghost of a murderous young girl haunts a small European village in around 1900. One could read this movie as a reflection on what happens when the crimes of the past are buried but not acknowledged or repaired. and thus return to disturb the present. That's what happens in this actually rather bizarre movie. I would be surprised if Trump has gone that deeply into the matter. But the really spooky thing is that the original Italian title of this movie was not Kill Baby Kill, but Operazione Paura, Operation Fear, the name given by the Brexiteers to anyone who tried to make the case for remaining in the EU. The idea being that fear of a negative future, of an uncertain future, was the key weapon in the Brexit argument, in the anti-Brexit argument. Someone should definitely look into this. Aleida closes her talk with a reminder that we can neither mend the breakages and suffering of the past, nor can we, on the other hand, awaken the dead. Nothing flexes and transforms our awareness of time as bereavement does. The death of someone we love creates a looping of time in which memory keeps breaking unpredictably into the present. Aleida's husband, the Egyptologist, cultural historian, and scholar of religion Jan Assman, died on the 19th of February 2024. Wir denken ja stark miteinander, allerdings von ganz unterschiedlichen Ausgangspunkten aus. We do think very much together, albeit from different points of departure. That's something that Aleida said in 2018 in the context of an interview, and that is as true tonight, I think, as it was when she said these words. And that, in turn, is surely the deeper meaning of the words of Faulkner that Aleida cited tonight. The past is not dead, it's not even past. Thank you. Thank you, Aleida.
Thank you so much. So we have time for a few more questions.
Well, thank you very much for this brilliant lecture. I want to dwell a bit on the use of the word repair here. It just reminds me of a classic Japanese concept called kintsugi, or the aesthetic, which is very much the same meaning but slightly different. It's about when the vessel is broken. So the way they repair it, it's not to pretend the brokenness has never happened. Instead, they highlight it with golden. They highlight it with gold, so that it becomes much sought after object after that. So in a way, they are not just repairing the brokenness, but they kind of celebrate it and remakes it into something that's even more glorious. I just wonder if you are aware of that concept, if you want to kind of build down further from that a bit.
No, I'm not aware of that concept, but thank you. I take it as a gift, for thoughts. Usually I'm asked from a different cultural point of view, in the sense of downplaying the concept of repair by saying that is so easy and so what, and now it's whole again. This is why I emphasize, no, it's not going to be whole again, it will be transformed into something else. And you just told me what else means. It will maybe become more valuable after the repair. It shows an act of attention and focusing on it, and it is a form of giving the object more dignity, by letting it live longer. Which would, of course, include a very technical or mechanical use of repair. Very often in German context, it is understood in this way. So I'm thankful that you bring in this other dimension. Yeah, first point, I'm not only trying to point to a change of our time concept, but also to the plurality of this time concept. I think it's important to think in various ways, make our thinking about more complex, because the historical form of thinking about it, first you have situation A and then follows situation B. It's much more complicated because it's still with us. It's more along the lines of Faulkner says past is not, that it's not even past. But the question is really important. Just give me one more word, because I was concerning your question. One more clue?
Summarize it again.
Yeah, no, just, yeah.
So what I was asking about was, you know, to what extent is what you're describing for the West
Yeah,
also
China.
visible
Yeah, the
in
example
China,
of
because
China.
you have this idea of
Okay.
returning to a glorious past?
Okay, so I think we are not only speaking about different cultures of time or modes of thinking of time here, but also about something that is anthropologically very, very basic, and I'm happy that you address it. And this is the regime of emotions. I didn't have the time to talk about this more extendedly. And when we bring in repair is connected with a mode of responsibility, which I used. Responsibility is very often used in spite of guilt, the term guilt, to address the crimes of one's own history within one is a task that in the history of mankind is very, very rare, and it only started after the Second World War. So it's a very recent phenomenon, and it is very interesting what is so strongly impeding it, and that is pride. And pride is, again, something that is very universal, and it applies not only to collectives, but also to individuals. So we have to count for the dynamics of the emotions here. And pride is something that creates all kinds of pretexts and pretenses. Wherever we have a long period of silence, pride is always part of it. It's a gatekeeper, in a way, against opening up the door for communication about this. And I think we have to learn more about it and also to exchange the terms, because as in Germany for a long time, the term was guilt. But then Max Mannheimer, for instance, former Holocaust survivor who was in Dachau, he went to many schools in Bavaria. And when he went to schools, he always said to the students, you're not guilty for what happened back then, but you're all responsible that it will not be repeated here in this country, which is your country. And he also included not only the younger generations, but also the those with migrant histories. So he made a very inclusive, transformed it into an inclusive project. And right now, the concept of pride among this third and fourth generation in Germany is being molded in a new way. They are no longer prepared to accept this old sense of pride, collective pride, which Trump stands for, Make America Great Again. By the way, this term, Make America Great Again, is a repetition because it was Hitler who used it after 1918, when the NSDAP was founded. It was really the slogan, Make Germany Great Again, had become so small. So this is going back to a past, and using the politics of pride. And it takes a lot of communication and learning and education to move away from these very blunt concepts that in a way impede our acting and even also thinking. But I think we are in a process of transformation in which all of these issues that you are mentioning, and thank you for bringing up the concept of pride here, is important.
Thank you for your very fascinating lecture this evening. I wonder whether you could say a little bit more about those contexts in which erasure is seen as an important component of repair, and what that might also tell us about the inherent selectivity towards the past in any form and any act of repair. Thank you.
A very important question. It relates to the 4 decades that I referred to, for instance, in Germany. And there was agreement about the silence, that it was not an obstructive silence, but as Hermann Löbbe put it, a communicative silence, kommunikatives Beschweigen, which meant that everybody knew what people did not talk about. And this can indeed have the possibility to open up a common future. And it did so after the treaty Peace Treaty Osnabrück, Münster, which ended, the civil war was ended with a mutual promise of silence. And even in Spain, of course, 1977, there was this Pact of Silence, which was agreed upon in order to introduce a new democracy. So there may be very good reasons to keep silent, but the interesting thing is it is not a sustainable solution. We now know. Neither in Dacia will know much more about this, but certainly not in Germany. And we can also use this formula: silence is always good for the perpetrators and very harmful for the victims. So it is a very asymmetrical system that is established, and it can be used temporarily as a transitional period. Of course, it can have its effects, but it certainly is not the solution. There are historians like Christian Meyer who wrote about it, and he is still in favor of it. But he's still also part of this post-45 generation. So there are different positions also.
Thank you so much for the talk. I was really moved by your the idea of humility in repair work, and I think I was thinking a lot about the recent German election and the idea of this sense of history repeating itself. And however, to me, it kind of seemed like what was quite, let's say, striking about the AfD is that they attack this precise kind of, I guess, time regime or memory culture in Germany, but focusing on a very different group of people, one that was never included in this collectivity. So my question is, how do we kind of make space for extended collectivities to, I think, as you mentioned, like bring people from migrant backgrounds, for instance, into this idea of responsibility, and how that, like, the regime of repair work doesn't in its own way become institutionalized and then become really ossified, and then you cannot expand it, and it becomes prideful in a way, like we're so good at repairing our past, and therefore, you know, we have no issues with all the things that have happened in between then. Yeah.
Okay, these are arguments that I very often hear. The point is really, first of all, is an inclusive memory culture or in Germany? I think it could be, because if it would be extended, it would be definitely fossilized if it would be would turn to be exclusive, because there are new memories, new cases pressing, and some of them having to do with migrant histories, and not only with the histories they bring along, which, for instance, are very pertinent because they relate to the colonial period, which would be a shared history that would have to be dealt with exactly along the lines that I'm arguing here for, but also the histories that they experienced in Germany itself. And I'm speaking of the two cases, for instance, the murder in Hanau, or the NSU-Morde, the murder of the NSU, a team of two men murdering for 1 decade, you know, and very lax form of investigation, and even making it hard for the victims to even gain interest in all of this. It was a terrible experience for them. And exactly these episodes are now also relevant to be included into this German memory culture. So it has to become diversified, definitely, and extended to include these other cases and issues and periods. And in these, there would be more the possibility of participation and also creating a climate in the country in which you are heard and seen, and so forth. This is exactly what is the background. It's a process in which this could go on along the lines that you are suggesting.
Thank you.